Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto 3rd generation Dragon Slayer. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. And check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Chapter 1. A fresh start where one belongs. 2 weeks had passed since Sasuke, Naruto, Sakura and Kakashi managed to Kagile Satsuki and put an end to the infinite Tsukiyomi. However, as a result of their battle and blood loss from the destruction of an arm each, the two ended up in a deep coma. Most of this time was spent gathering the fallen for a mass funeral held in all the villages. The death toll was staggering, but the villages would endure. The Shinobi Alliance had held together, despite the absence of its keystone Naruto, who lay unconscious beside Sasuke. There were a few whispers about holding Sasuke responsible for the actions of Madara and Obito, despite Obito's change of heart and aid in helping the duo free then, the whispers died down rather fast as they were just people mourning and wanted to see someone punished as the two main Uchiha were dead. However, holding the only living Uchiha who had suffered as much if not more than all of them seemed wrong when it was his interference that kept them from losing earlier on in the war. He had redeemed his clan's name with his actions and himself in the eyes of Konoha. Their vitals are stable, Sakura says in a way that says any good news will do, so perhaps they are closer to waking up, she adds, turning to all the other people in the room, consisting of Shikamaru, Ino, Choji, Kiba, Hinata and Shino. Rock Lee and Tenten were off saying their goodbyes to Niji before their mission to look for wounded in the areas where the 10 tails struck while searching for HQ. That's good, they will both be essential for bringing peace into the future for all villages, not just the big 5, Shikamaru says, looking at the blonde who would be Hokage one day and a man who he would use all his knowledge to help be the best Hokage ever. Then there was the anomaly in the room. Sasuke Uchiha still had an uneasy feeling in his stomach looking at the last of the most powerful clan in Konoha. Yet he did save them all, maybe he had changed. I can't picture that ugly mug on the Hokage mountain. Kiba smirks, crossing his arms. He remembered in his dream he was Hokage and thought he did a fine job guiding the village. He's far better looking than you, dog boy, Ino says flirtatiously as Kiba growls at her, annoyed by her comment, just like Lord Fourth. It was no secret now that Naruto was the 4th Hokage's son, and now that it was out the resemblance was so unreal many couldn't believe they didn't figure it out before. Despite her flirtatious nature, she knew Naruto wasn't for her as she eyes Sai, who had been reading a book for a while. It feels like things will be quiet from now on, at least for a while, Sakura says. Who knows how long the peace would last, so it would be best to enjoy it and rest. Shikamaru and Ino both left together as they were now clan heads, while Choji would leave moments later to meet his father for the same reason. Team Kurenai left together to get some food, leaving Sakura alone with her teammates. I'd better soon, you two, she smiles, rubbing their shoulders before leaving to tend to the wounded. Once she left, Kagile Satsuki appears in the room looking down at the descendants of her son. They had thoroughly defeated her in battle even after being separated. Now they would most likely succumb to eternal sleep. These children have been through a lot both together and separately. She thinks, watching a nurse enter to give them an injection and fluff their pillows. They do not belong here, she thinks, gliding over to them and touching their foreheads, causing their eyes to open, yet remain blank before closing again after she disappears into their dreams. In her world, Naruto and Sasuke's eyes open as they find themselves in the world where they received their 6 paths power from Hagoromo. Only this time they are staring at Kagaya, his mother and their last opponent. Their bodies had no wounds and no missing limbs. Of course they paid no mind to it now. Why you? Naruto yells, pointing at her. She simply sighs at his action. I thought we killed you. He says, looking at Sasuke, who shrugs. I don't get this. He says, clutching his head in his hands while crouching down. Be calm, I do not wish to fight you, Kagaya says, remaining compassed despite the blonde's actions. Besides, I no longer have the will to nurse this world, she says. A mother's worst fear is when her children no longer need her, she explains. She saw the whole world as her nursery and those in it her babies, but when she lost she knew her babies had grown up. Then what do you want? Sasuke asks, crossing his arms suspiciously. Much like her own sons, she could tell this boy had a cautious nature, yet remained compassed, unlike the descendant of Asura, who seemed to be an idiot with a big heart. The talk, she says, showing them the hospital room they were in. You both have been in a comatose state for 2 weeks, and the world is moving on, she begins. I believe you were not meant to survive this battle, and thus bring an end to the reincarnation cycle of Indra and Asura, she says. You mean we're going to die? Naruto asks, and she nods. But I haven't become Hokage after all that, he says, sounding depressed. Naruto, you obtained a better title, savior, Sasuke says in a surprisingly comforting way. Besides, the likes of us becoming a Kage would seem unfair, he explains, confusing Naruto separately. We could wipe out a village and together we could change to world, however we chose, he states. Perhaps dying is the better choice, he states. I planned on dying anyway, he adds. What do you mean? I thought you wanted to become Hokage. Naruto asks with wide eyes. When Sasuke and Sakura stood side by side again, he thought they had come full circle, but hearing this, it seems Sasuke hadn't quite returned to his old self. Naruto, you can't honestly believe I could return to the village that sees Itachi as a monster. Sasuke asks and Naruto looks away, and if we told the truth, then we'd be digging up my parents just to run their names through the muddy ads. I want to be with them again, have no regrets, he finishes. Well, he did what Jiraiya asked me to do, the world acknowledges me, no, so I guess I have no regrets either, Naruto says, although I would have liked to marry Sakura, he smirks perversely. There is another path, Kagaya says, getting their attention. You may have guessed this, but I came from a different world, she explains. This world was filled with magic and wars just like this one, so I used a spell to come to this land to escape the conflict, she states. Perhaps this is a mother's instinct, but I feel it would be a waste to see you die here, so I will make you a deal, she says. I can send you to my world in return for the chakra my son gave you, she says. Do not be concerned, it seems I can no longer adversely affect the world, she explains before they can ask her intentions. I can only interact with you because you have my son's chakra, she finishes. So well, you will lose the power you gained. You may start a new life in my world, she says, seeing Naruto ponder this. In truth, Naruto didn't want to die, but if he gave up his 6 paths, what's to stop her from just killing them? He looked at Sasuke, who was also thinking about it. What do you know about this world? He asks. The thing he cannot see into it, all I know it is as peaceful as this world, she says. If you would like I can return one soul with you, she says. Like all Rinnegan, mine can perform the Rinnegan rebirth jutsu, however I will not die, she says. Nor do I need a body to return the soul to, she adds. It can be anyone who died, she says, sounding smug. Anyone Sasuke thinks I accept, he says, immediately followed by Naruto. They watch as she pulls the chakra from their bodies. I have read your thoughts and will bring those you have chosen back from the dead, she says. The two exchange looks before nodding. Close your eyes and open your mind, she instructs, and they do so, closing their eyes and taking a deep breath. They felt the world around them begin to shift and rotate, and soon everything goes dark. Take care, descendants of Hagoromo, she thinks, fading away. Fiori, in the city of Magnolia, is the home of the strongest wizard guild in Fiori fairy tale, a place for wizards to gather and find work and make friends, a place to call home. Among the younger generation sits a redhead named Erza Scarlet, a recently promoted to S-class ad in the corner eating a slice of cake, while the guild around her roared in a huge brawl with the ice wizard Grey and the fire dragon slayer Natsu. At the core of the battle I would intervene, but this cake tastes divine, she thinks to herself, cutting a bite-sized piece with her fork before stabbing it, but the fork and lifting it to her mouth when a raw fish knocks the utensil from her hand and landing on the plate, smashing her dessert. For a brief moment, as everyone but Natsu felt the intent to crush, maim and destroy emulate from the corner of the guild. Ha, I win. Natsu cheers loudly but freezes when the cold steel touches his cheek. What the hell, Erza? He says but remains motionless. You all act like a bunch of savages starting brawls. Despite how late it is, she begins glaring at everyone. We are the strongest guild yet. Yao, you squished my cake, she says, sounding as if her cake being crushed was the straw that broke the camel's back. I will take all of your heads for recompense, she says, earning a collective gasp form an orderly line. Natsu, I'll start with you, she orders. Enough. They all see Master Makarov entering the hall. The lot of you will drive me to an early grave. He says go home, it's late, he says, and with a sigh of relief the room emptied. Once he was on his own, he took out a small orb. It has happened, he says, and the man on the other end opens his eyes. I saw a portal open and 2 young men fly out and towards the mountains. Well, I will inform the council, but I have to admit I thought they'd be men, Yajima says. Perhaps these aren't the ones written in the books, he states. Either way, the Rune Knights will have to track them down, he says. I'll let you know what comes next, he finishes and vanishes from the orb. I hope you are right about them not being related, but the dark-haired boy matches the description, Makarov says to himself. Somewhere in the mountainous region. Back. The hurt. Naruto says, rubbing his lower back as Sasuke looks around. Upon landing they created a huge crater. Why did she open a portal so high up? He wonders, looking around as well. Sasuke activates his Sharingan and looks at his arm. This isn't Shinjutsu, he says, and Naruto looks at her, and I don't sense anything different about our chakra, but there isn't much in this world, he says as the two jump out of the crater. I wonder if she really brought who we chose back to life, he says, and Naruto shrugs. I mean, it may have been a lie to get us to give out our power of the 6 paths up to her, he says. I don't know, her words felt genuine, Naruto says, looking down, but hey, at least we got each other right. He turns, smirking at Sasuke, who was already a couple yards away. Hey bastard, don't walk off while I'm getting sentimental, he yells. How you say something? Sasuke looks over his shoulder with a disinterested look, causing an angry tick to form on Naruto's forehead. And don't act like Kakashi-sensei either with that cool relaxed composure either. He yells, chasing after the Uchiha. After a few moments of walking they find themselves at the peak of the mountain. But whereon maybe I can sense a town in my sage mode, Naruto says, quickly gathering nature energy, thus activating his sage mode. I sense a small town down there, he says, pointing down towards the right. You should go that way, he says, confusing Sasuke. There is a powerful whatever down there, he explains. It's not made of chakras, Sasuke says, using his Sharingan. Okay, I am curious now, he says, and the two run to the source of the strange phenomenon. Not too far away. Elfman. Marahin yelled, watching her brother who performed a full-body takeover. Beast soul, however, he was unable to control this power, and as a result he was currently on a rampage. She and Elfman, along with their other sibling Lysana, are all members of Fairy Tail, and like Erza, Marahin is an S-class wizard. However, her arm was broken, and she was unable to use her own takeover magic Satan Soul, so she can't fight him. The beast turns to Marahin and begins approaching her. Elfman, it's your baby sister Lysana. Lysana says softly, getting between him and Marahin. It's okay, we aren't angry. She smiles. Let's go home, says. Now can I get a hug? She asks, extending her arms for a hug. Lysana, don't. Marahin yells, run away. She screams as Elfman swings at her. Marahin's eyes widen as time slows down as the beast hand draws closer. Suddenly two strange boys come from out of nowhere. The blonde hugs Lysana, jumping back, while the raven-haired summons a purple arms and punches Elfman in the gut, sending him down to the ground. Close call. The blonde smiles. Almost didn't make it, he says, looking into his eyes which reminded her of a frog with orange eyelids. What were you thinking? He asks. It's okay, that's my big brother, Lysana says with a giggle, shocking the two boys. The fact she could also giggle like that after almost getting crushed was also surprised the two. We use takeover magic, she explains. Okay. Naruto looks at Sasuke, who shrugs. Marahin could tell these two had no idea what Lysana was saying, but right now she didn't care. Can you knock him out? She asks, gaining the two boys' attention. If you can, he will revert back to his normal self, she explains, and the two nod. Sasuke, you stay back, Naruto says. I got this, the blonde says, charging at the huge monster with incredible speed. Elfman rips a tree out the ground and hurls it at Naruto, who blocks the tree with one hand effortlessly. Amazing, Marahin thinks, watching the blonde easily overpower her fully taken over brother, and the fact that he made it look easy was even more impressive. Where did this guy come from? She wonders, looking at the raven-haired teen who was standing beside her little sister with his arms folded. Elfman let out a roar as he hurled multiple large trees at Naruto and the other, Sasuke, incoming. Naruto warns, drilling Elfman in the stomach with a powerful right hook which caught him. Sasuke uses his Chidori Nagashi to reduce the trees to shavings. His lightning is different to Laxus's, Mira thinks as Naruto carries the giant monster over and slumps him to the ground. Oh, her wrist is broken and shoulder is dislocated, Sasuke says about Marahin's injured arm, and Naruto nods, kneeling down, and Sasuke kneels behind her, holding her in place. The blonde grabs her arm gently just above her elbow and looks at her with sympathy. This will suck royally, he warns her as she nods and takes a deep breath. Naruto places his free hand on the right side of her collar and with one push her arm pops back into place. Her scream woke Elfman up as he had reverted back to normal. What the where am I? He says, and is suddenly hugged by his two tearful sisters. What's going on? Take over, he realizes. Did I hurt anyone? He asks, and Marahin shakes her head. No, thankfully these two came and stopped you before you did, though, she says. If they hadn't, then Lysana would have been most likely dead. Thank you, Elfman says, but pauses so they can introduce themselves. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, the blonde says with a big grin. Sasuke Uchiha, the raven-haired boy, continues with a more serious look, clearly the more compassed of the two. I'm Marahin Stratus, the longer-haired girl says to the two, and he's Elfman and she's Lysana, the youngest. Well, I'm the oldest, she finishes, adding the last part in a rush. Due to looking older, Elfman must be mistaken as the oldest sibling a lot. We don't have the tools to wrap that wrist, can you make it from here? Sasuke asks, and they nod. Then this is goodbye, he says, surprising Naruto. I can sense a familiar presence, he says, and Naruto's eyes widen as Sasuke begins to walk away. He turns to them and waves. Wait. Marahin calls out to them, and they stop, looking over their shoulder. If you are ever in Magnolia, stop by Fairy Tail to say hello, she says, and Naruto nods, turning around, giving her a thumbs up. Count on it, he says before the two run off at a fast pace. Naruto could tell by looking at Sasuke's face that it was whoever Kagaya revived for him, and he had no doubt who it was. Was it right for me to choose him? Sasuke thinks to himself, he died for the village, and now he will be in a different world, he adds as they arrive at an opening. There, standing in his Akatsuki robes, was the savior of the shinobi world. Itachi, Chapter 2. Learning the land. Titania and Uchiha, having reunited with Itachi after his resurrection. By a spectator view like Naruto's, the reunion seemed awkward. He could tell they were happy, but perhaps over-the-top tearful hugs would be out of character for them. Afterwards, as they traveled down, Sasuke and Naruto filled Itachi in on what happened after the reanimation was released, and Itachi returned to the land of the dead, all including Sasuke resurrecting the past Hokage to learn about Konoha's founding, then saving everyone and deciding to return to the village as an ally and save the world from Kagaya, who had tricked Madara into resurrecting her and almost taking over the world, but the two managed to defeat her, but as a result ended up in a coma. Then how she sent the two here to start new lives since their bodies were slowly dying, and as a bonus, she would revive someone of our choosing and send them here too. It's an amazing story, Itachi says, looking at the two. It's hard to believe so much happened after the reanimation was undone, he states, and the two nod in agreement. He was happy the two were here together since they were practically family. So now that we found you, what next? Sasuke asks turning to Itachi as they all come to a stop. I think we should split up he says, and Naruto is about to protest. We can use this town as a base and work our way to different towns gathering up info, then in 2 or 3 days return here so we can share info he explains. That's a good idea Itachi agrees as the two brothers seem more in sync. I can use my bird summons to lengthen my search he adds, and Naruto's eyes brighten. Itachi smirks seeing that his idea has helped Naruto realize what he can do, and I can use my shadow clones to search more towns. He says and Itachi nods that way I can learn more and quicker he explains and Sasuke scoffs, causing Naruto to look at him with an annoyed expression. Multiplying an idiot won't improve his learning capacity, Sasuke says earning a growl from Naruto so we will meet up in 3 days. He asks for confirmation getting a nod from the two. Naruto leaves first leaving the brothers alone Itachi I'm glad you're alive again, he says looking away from his older brother, though he can see his baby brother's face Itachi smiles nonetheless. See you soon, little brother Itachi says summoning a hawk and jumping onto it, try to lighten up this is a new world so try to find a new you, and with that the bird flies off as Sasuke watches it get smaller in the distance before walking into town alone. Magnolia. 2 days had passed since the Strauss siblings encountered Sasuke and Naruto, and after the day's rest and train back to their hometown of Magnolia, they walked into the Fairy Tail Guild Hall and split up. Lysana went looking for Natsu while Elfman went to talk with Team Shadow Gear's Jet and Droy, while the third member Levi read a book. Marahan walked up to Master Makarov, and the first thing he saw was her sling-wrapped arm. What happened? He asks and Marahan explains that she got hurt when during the mission and as a result, Elfman did a full body takeover, only to be unable to control it and go on a rampage. I see so Lysana was saved by 2 wizards and weird magic. He asks. Well only one Naruto fought my brother, while the other Sasuke kept us from getting caught up in the battle. She clarifies Naruto was able to catch a tree stump from a huge tree after Elfman threw it at him with one hand. He made it look like a pillow she explains then, after they popped my shoulder. Even by the description she gave they are the 2 men I saw flying through the sky. Makarov thinks to himself, if they helped Mira and Lysana from Elfman's rampage, then they must be good he scratches his chin. He looks up to see he has been too quiet and left Mira waiting. I'll sit on this for no go home and get some rest after having a nice hot meal he suggests, and she nods. Did you hear that? He asks and a tall blonde-haired man walks out from behind a pillar. Laxus what have I told you about spying? He asks and the young man crosses his arms. It's a free guild hall Laxus says in an arrogant way, I mean, I can't be held accountable for hearing something spoken in public, he explains as Freed, Evergreen and Bixlow walk beside him, gaining the guild's attention well. Laxus looks at Freed over his shoulder. Saying nothing Freed nods and Laxus smirks well Gramps we're going on a long job he says, and the old master nods. Watching his grandson leave he lets out a sigh as a red head appears. Sorry master but I heard as well, and it seems you know more than you are letting on Erza says sitting on a bar stool are these people dangerous? She asks, if they were then it would be up to her to deal with them. In all honesty I don't know the short man sighs closing his eyes, but don't worry about it, he says turning to the S-class wizard the council is already taking them under observation. He didn't really want to tell her this, but he knew her pride would get the better of her, and she would go looking for them. I see was all he got as he watched her leave the guild. Natsu and Happy, the fire dragon slayer and the flying cat sat by a lake fishing like they normally do. It has been a few years since Happy hatched from the egg Natsu found, and since then the two had become best buddies. Although Lysana claims they are more like father and son, and she is the mother and Natsu's wife. Natsu? The pink-haired teen turns to see Lysana running towards them. I'm back she says, and Natsu flashes a toothy grin. Welcome back he says feeling a tug on the line. Ah. I got a bite. He says and begins reeling the fish in. Don't let the yummy fish get away, Happy says licking his lips as Lysana sits down to join them and watches the two with a small smile. Since she almost died on that last job, she would have never got the chance to say goodbye. Natsu you won't believe it, but on the last job we were on we ran into powerful wizards she says seeing Natsu not showing much interest other than a nod. They may have been as strong as Gildert she adds, and suddenly gets the pink-haired teen's full attention. Whoa were they that strong? He asks with sparkling eyes already dreaming of facing them. Where are they now? He asks shaking his fists with anticipation, with a casual shrug, and a mumbled I dunno completely deflates his excitement. Then why tell me? He says flailing slightly. Because they saved my life she admits, and he suddenly becomes surprised at hearing this revelation. She then explains how Mira got hurt, and Elfman did a full body takeover and went on a rampage, and almost squashed her until they intervened. I just wanted you to know in case you see them before Mizo, you can tell them thanks for me she says, and he nods. I will Natsu says, but gets a thump on the head from Happy. What was that for? He yells and the blue cat points to his hands which were empty. Ah my fishing rod. He says diving into the lake. Come here you stupid fish. He growls underwater looking for the fish with his rod. Giggling, Lysana stands up and looks around. Thank you for saving me, she smiles, watching Happy scold the dragon slayer. Far away in a different city, Itachi wandered through the second city he traveled to, having used his Sharingan to quickly read newspapers and magazines, and as a result he learned about the recent news. However, now he was in search of a library, since it was likely Sasuke and Naruto will have read the newspaper as well. He entered the huge building and went straight for the history section. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, he whispers, summoning two clones to read the two other books. This world seems to be similar to our world, he thinks. This world uses magic, which is like their jutsu, only it doesn't require hand seals, and instead of chakra they use magic energy. The difference between the worlds was unlike the element nations, where everyone is able to become a shinobi with the right training from a young age. Here, only 10% of the people here can use magic. Reading on, he learns about the dark times of constant wars, which was like back before the era of the villages, and similarly the wars came to an end here when guilds were founded. By the end of the day, Itachi and his clones closed their respective books, and dispelling the clones with a sigh, having read 3 massive books in the space of a day, was tiring and without food left him drained. He feels someone tapping on his shoulder. Turning around, he is surprised when he sees a beautiful woman his age smiling down at him. Can I help you? He asks. The woman finds herself blushing upon hearing his wise soft tone and his rather intense gaze. Sorry, I just saw you reading and couldn't help but come over and talk, she says, and he nods. My name is Altair, and I was wondering if you wanted to get dinner me treat. She asks. Itachi found this a bit suspicious that this woman was offering food. Just as he was thinking about how hungry he was, he smirked, standing up and returned the books to their respective shelves. After all, with such an enticing offer, how can I say no, he says in a charming tone which earns a genuine embarrassed look from this Altair. The two walk through the town. She was surprised how much attention he was getting from the girls, but she could understand watching his calm composure walk in the shade of the building. Had she not have been here on a mission, then perhaps she would be inclined to get to know his on an intimate level. Her eyes widen when he steps from the shadow, and the sun shines his pale complexion and deep black onyx eyes. Remember why you are here for, master, she thinks to herself as they continue to walk in silence. So what made you interested in the history of Fiori and magic? She asks. I have always found myself drawn to knowledge, and being from a faraway land made me curious of the past this country has had, Itachi says, unbuttoning his coat. I'm curious to what a council member wants with an unknown person like me, he says, and she looks at him with a shocked look, but his stone face hid how much of a lucky guess that was. He knew there was a small chance of the leaders of this country knowing about their arrival through some method. The symbol on your hip gives you away, he says, and she looks down. My, but how did know I was a member? She asks, and he simply smirks. You just told me, he says, and she glares before following him to see this through. Naruto. Unlike the two brothers, Naruto is terrible when it comes to this sort of thing. He was better at fighting and searching than at gathering info. Still, he had managed to learn about guild rankings and the purpose of guilds. Man so hungry, he whines, wandering through the street of the town he was in. Hello there, young man. Naruto turns to see Yamaji standing behind him. I couldn't help but overhear you. Would you like to help me in return for a meal? He asks. Yamaji smiled when he heard the young man's stomach answer for him. I promise it'll be a nice big meal, he smirks to sweeten the deal. Sure, what do you need? Naruto asks, and the small man points to about 10 shopping bags. What the hell? He says loudly, not even seeing how the bags were already at his feet. Must have been magic or something, he thinks to himself as the old man began to speak. I am opening a restaurant and these are the food supplies, Yamaji explains. However, the deliveryman only delivered them to this point. He sighs. I'll cook you something good, he says, and Naruto nods. Yamaji knew full well Naruto was from another world, and this was his test to see the boy's heart. Shadow clone jutsu, Naruto says, summoning 4 clones each carrying 2 bags. So where is this place? He asks, and Yamaji leads the way, getting a good feel for the blonde. Yamaji can tell he is a good kid with a pure heart, no danger at all. Once they reach the building and the food is stored away properly, the elderly man turns to his helper. Have a seat, and I'll prepare you something, he smiles, and Naruto nods with a smirk of his own. So tell me, what are you look for? Yamaji asks. I mean, you seem to have something besides food on your mind, he explains. Am I gathering news since I'm new? Naruto says sheepishly. Perhaps it could have came off as suspicious, but Naruto's aura gave off a warm feeling. So what do you plan on naming this place? He asks, changing the subject. Yamaji scratches his chin. I hadn't really thought about it, he says with a small shrug. Any suggestions? Sasuke. Magnolia was fresh in his mind. Sasuke had chosen this town to be where he gathers info on the world. He assumed Itachi would look towards history, and Naruto would most likely read the paper. This left him with the task of learning about the laws and leadership of the land. After finding himself in the town bookstore, he read a book simply titled The Magic Council, as if the book existed for the sole purpose of explaining exactly what Sasuke needed to know. He used a clone and transformation technique to replace the book as he sealed the book away with Kenjutsu so nobody would notice until it was too late. As he walked through the street, he heard halt. come from behind him, turning around he is greeted by a red-headed girl his age. "I saw what you did," she says, pointing a sword at his chest. "Listen here, girl," Sasuke says, turning to face her with a dark expression. "Don't go making accusations your skills can't back up," he states. "Now put that toy away before you get yourself hurt," he says warningly. He glances at the spectators who seem surprised at his actions. "Don't worry," the girl says, unintimidated by his glare. "My skills are more than capable of dealing with criminals like you," she says, charging at him with surprising speed. Sasuke quickly pulls out his snake sword, parrying her attack. "Nicely done." She compliments. "My name is Erza Scarlet, and I am an S-class wizard of fairy tale," she introduces herself. "I'm Sasuke Uchiha and I don't care who you are," the Uchiha retorts. Her eyes widen hearing the name Sasuke. "Leave before I actually try and take you serious," he says with his trademark smirk. Ignoring his warnings, she charges at him as their swords clash. Years of training with the Sharingan made his skills and observation more refined, and the pattern in her moves were, however, when a second sword appears in her other hand, showing her to be ambidextrous with swordplay, made his eyes widen, activating his Sharingan in response. "Eye magic," she thinks, seeing as his reflexes improve greatly. His eyes move rapidly following her attacks as they happen almost before she is performing them. "Can he read me?" movement. She wonders, pulling back. "You are really skilled," she says, and her swords vanish. "I can see this is going nowhere," she says, and he smirks, putting his sword away. "It's only a book, I doubt it's worth getting hospital," Sasuke says, and she glares slightly. "That symbol," he says, looking at her breastplate. "A white-haired girl had that mark on her leg," he says. "Is it your guild's crest?" he asks, and she gives him a quizzical look. "You must mean Marahin," she says, and he nods, remembering the name. "You've never heard of fairy tale?" She asks, and rather than give a sarcastic remark on how he had and was asking for the good of his health, he simply shakes his head. "Well, we are the strongest guild in Fiori, and the most famous," she explains. "I see," Sasuke says. "Well, tell the white-haired girl Marahin that I said hello," he says, but Erza stops him. No words are spoken as she simply stares at him. After a moment more, "You have a really nice complexion," she says in a chibi face, causing him to raise an eyebrow. "What moisturizer do you use?" she asks curiously, rubbing his cheek. "Soap and water," he replies, swatting her hand away. "Now if you are done sexually harassing, I need to get going," he says, and she blushes at the accusation and watches him leave. Erza turns around and begins walking back to the guild. "Sasuke Uchiha," she thinks, "I hope we meet again in a rematch," she smirks, looking up to the sky. The following day, the Magic Council had gathered, managing to find the two people matching Makarov's description and planting trackers on them. They stood around to discuss what they learned. They are completely unaware that it was Sasuke who Makarov saw, and that there is 3 not 12 for now. "From the close-up encounter I had with the blonde Naruto," Yamaji begins. "He is a kind young man with an honest heart," he smiles, thinking back to their conversation and how the young man talked about forming a guild with his closest friend. "I see, so what did you learn, Altier?" the Chancellor asks the young beautiful woman. "Itachi Uchiha is an enigma and a wise man despite his youthful appearance," she says, mentally licking her lips. "Highly intelligent and strong, perhaps even stronger than those 4, she says, and their eyes widen. "Only time will tell if he is a threat," she finishes. "There is no way he is that strong, surely you exaggerate." A blue-haired man asks. "Those 4 aren't human," he adds. The Chancellor asks for my analysis. Seagrain, she replies to the man. "If you want to confirm its accuracy, then by all means attack him and find out," she says. "I will miss you terribly, though," she says, and he squints warningly while she smiles innocently. Itachi, Sasuke and Naruto upon regrouping. The evening sun had cloaked the sky with an orange glow. The 3 shinobi stand atop the highest building exchanging information gathered. Once done they jump to the ground. "Our first task is acquiring money," Itachi states, "and the 2 not our best bet is to join guilds and take on jobs," he explains. "Should we join the same guild or separate ones?" Sasuke asks. I think it would be better to join separate honesteds. More than likely others from our world have been here before, and as a result we could become targeted, so staying in a group would give them an easy target," he explains. "Why don't we create our own guild?" Naruto suggests. He hated the idea of splitting up, but he could understand why. Why settle for any guild when together we can create one like Konoha," he explains. "There is probably a lot to it that simply calling ourselves a guild," Sasuke says, and Naruto deflates. "We need more info on guilds before even considering joining a guild," he adds, and Naruto brightens up. "That is a good plan, but we should join guilds and learn on how they operate so we can use them for reference and create a guild," Itachi says, "or see if we can hire ourselves as temporary guild members and travel for a few years," he adds. But his and Sasuke's eyes would any sense a familiar person, an old friend. Itachi smiles when he senses a new presence. "Who is it?" Sasuke says, turning his head slightly, and Naruto smirks. The final person appears. Sasuke's eyes widen. He expected it to be either Minato or Jiraiya, but instead he was staring at a red-headed pale-skinned man with a Rinnegan. Nagato, Chapter 3. 2 years in the making. Time before achieving one's dream. Naruto the redhead blinks as the 2 sit alone. For some reason he was younger than when he died, not much older than Itachi. "I think you were reckless in choosing me to bring back," he says as the 2 sit in the grass, "but thank you," he smiles. Well, I just thought you tried to do something good, but ended up being manipulated by Madara, Naruto says awkwardly, so I thought you deserved a chance at a new life, he explains, but you look so much younger, he states. I am 25, he states. I was this age when I fused myself with the Jito statue, he explains. Perhaps whatever the rabbit princess did needed to take the chakra that I absorbed when I fused with the statue, he suggests, unsure what the reason was. Soon after, Sasuke and Itachi returned with firewood and quickly got a fire going. While sitting around, they pooled all their knowledge together to form a solid plan. Soon after, the idea of creating a new guild came up again. It was a good plan since it could be for them and anyone else that wants to join a unique guild. So we should split up and see if independent work pays off, Sasuke says. I mean, if the four of us pool in a good sum of money, then we can buy some land and start building a guild hall, he explains. Well, how can we keep in contact? Naruto asks curiously. I mean, it's not like we can meet up, he says. If we intend to do this, we shouldn't stop until we have enough, he states, looking down, hating the idea that they would split up only after reuniting. We will meet every 6 months and take into account the money we gather, Itachi says, taking the lead. But do not hoard all the money and live off scraps, Naruto, he says, seeing the young blonde look depressed. This is a goal, and it shouldn't be rushed, he explains. When something important is rushed, it becomes half-hearted in the overall attempt to see it finish. Take your time and enjoy the experience, he finishes. These words were directed at Naruto, and the others noticed. Naruto gave a single nod in understanding at Itachi, whose gaze is already on his younger brother. And you shouldn't be overly serious, he says, glaring at the world will not make us any allies, and if we want to be taken seriously, then we need to build relationships with the guilds already established, he says, and Sasuke nods. So no bad mouthing, threatening, or simply glaring at people, he finishes. Why am I getting a list and Naruto isn't? The younger Uchiha thinks but nods nonetheless. So I think I'll head west if the pep talk is over, he asks, and Itachi nods. Sasuke turns around and glances at Naruto, who is looking depressed. Naruto, he says, and the blonde glances at him. I will be the one who collects the most monetary and beat me if you can, he smirks, as Naruto's eyes light up slightly. You're on, he yells, turning to Itachi. I'll be heading east, Naruto says before the two teens bolt away in opposite directions. Once alone, Nagato stood beside Itachi with a small smile. No pep talk for me? He asks, and Itachi shakes his head. Then let me give you some, he says more seriously. In a roundabout way, we have been given a second lease on life, he begins. We should use to gild Sasuke and Naruto, since they suffered much because of us, he states. True, Nagato was behind many of the deaths of the Jinchuriki and even destroyed Konoha. Itachi wiped out the Uchiha clan that would cause Sasuke to become evil when the truth came into the light. I almost forgot you are in Uzumaki, which makes you and Naruto members of the same clan, Itachi says, and Nagato nods. A blood relative to the Senju clan, just like in the past. He looks around the huge area the Uchiha and Senju Uzumaki will create a place of peace, he says, and without looking, acknowledges the nod from the redhead as he heads south while Nagato heads north. 2 years later, almost in the blink of an eye, 2 years passed, each passed from guild to guild. And once 3 months passed, they would depart from the guild after learning all they needed to know and gather. And once they collected money and info on how that guild is run, they would meet up in the same place they departed from at the beginning. Their combined total of saved jewel as just under 10 million, which was a lot, but apparently not nearly enough to start a guild, so they separated again and repeated the process, earning another 10 million. According to the property management, they needed another 30 million to buy the size of land they wanted. When they reunited for the first time in 6 months, they decided, rather than build a guild on its own, they would build a small town too. They changed their clothing too to suit this world's weather. Sasuke retained a traditional style to his own, only he wore similar fragments of the armor worn by Madara around his shoulders. The material was dark purple. His rope belt had been replaced by a steel flat chain material which held his sword in place. His white shirt was now dark gray and was open, similar to how it was during his time with Orochimaru. It had the Uchiha crest on the back like before. He also wears black wrist warmers. He wore dark navy pants with a black cloth hanging from halfway up his stomach to his knees, which was held in place with a flat chain. His sandals remained the same in appearance, only now they were black and gray. Naruto lost his tracksuit in favor of a tight-fitting orange coat with long coattail-like cape, buttoned over a black t-shirt. He wore orange leather pants and black boots. Around his neck was a silver chain with a leaf of Konoha, which replaced the headband he lost while on a mission. He also wore a pair of black fingerless gloves. Itachi's appearance was similar in parts to Sasuke's, with a black kimono top with a navy belt wrapped around it. The top was tucked into a pair of black pants, and the ends were bandaged up and tucked into a pair of sandals. Like Naruto, he wore a necklace with a Konoha leaf, only Sasuke neglected to wear one. Nagato's appearance hadn't consisted of mesh armor with black accents under an identical t-shirt, with a simple white belt around the waist, and dark blue pants. He also wore robes identical to the original Akatsuki robes before the clouds were added. So there are two major guilds left, Itachi says, holding up a map of all the guilds. The ones worth learning from now are the top three, he states, Fairy Tail, Lamina Scale and Blue Pegasus, he says, pointing to the three. So that means 12 of us will join the same guild. Naruto asks, glancing at Sasuke. Naruto's whisker marks had faded over the 2 years, mainly due to the loss of Kurama, which was the main reason for them in the first place. Yes, Itachi says with a nod. I have sealed all the information gathered into this scroll, he explains, and they nod. I will join the Blue Pegasus and Nagato Lamina Scale, he says, and Nagato nods. You too. Since you have had past meetings with them, it's best you two handle this guild, he explains. They are one of the oldest and most powerful of all the guilds in Fiori, he continues, so I doubt our usual tactic won't work, so we will remain with these guilds until we have gathered the necessary funds, he finishes. So how will we stay in contact? Sasuke asks, and Itachi pulls out a lacrima, a communication lacrima, huh? Sasuke says, sealing the ball away. Well, if that's it, then we should head out, he says, looking at Naruto, who nods. One more thing, Nagato says, never show your full power, he says to the two. Thanks to his Rinnegan, he could tell they both had hidden powers thanks to the war. It is more than likely the council will be tracking us, knowing that we are from a different world, and will likely come after us if we come off as a threat, he explains, and the two nod. The jobs never really required them to go all out, but little did they know Fairy Tail would be a lot more challenging in more ways than one. Magnolia at noon. The sun beamed over the town of Magnolia. The townspeople laughed and smiled, filled with life and positive energy. However, the sound of steel clanking against itself gained their attention as their eyes widened with shock as the long flowing red hair of Erza Scarlet walked through the town with a huge horn slung on her shoulder. Her eyes were closed, having grown up in this town she knew its layout perfectly. Her eyes, however, opened once she entered the shade of the Fairy Tail Guild Hall. Opening the door, she looks around at all the members who were still and completely silent. Placing the horn down with a loud thud, I'm back, she says, and the lesser known guild members return to talking. Welcome back, Erza, Marahin says with a smirk. Took you long enough, she says, standing in front of her rival S-class wizard. Master is away at the convention before you ask, she states, seeing the redhead look around. I see, Erza says, nodding as Mira's siblings, along with Natsu and Gray, followed closely by Lucy, who was the newest member. What is that thing? Elfman asks, pointing at the horn which had decorations on it. It is the horn of a demon I slew in battle, Erza states in a casual way. The villagers were so grateful they decorated it for me, she explains. Why is that a problem? She asks with a small glare which causes Elfman to shake his head rapidly in fear. Frankly, I'm more concerned about what I've been hearing, she says. Kana, you need to control your alcohol intake, she says to the beauty with a barrel of ale in her arms. Vegeta, I told you, if you want to practice your dancing, do it outside, she says, and the dancing man slumps, giving a nod. On Ab, I expected to find you loitering around the request board, she says, and the muscular man stands up straight at the mention of his name. Just pick a job. Wakaba, please get rid of that filthy habit, she says, referring to his pipe. Macau, she simply sighs. Please say something. The fire wizard pleads, feeling that she was disappointed in him most. I don't know where to start, she says, rubbing her temples in frustration. You've caused so much trouble, I've almost given up on you, she says. Master Makarov may not care, but I certainly do, she says. Wow, she's really tearing into them, Lucy says to Marahin, though apart from being bossy she is the most normal person here, she adds, and Mira simply scoffs at the insinuation that she is abnormal. Is Gray and Natsu here? Erza asks, looking around, seeing two with their arms over the other's shoulders, both nervous and dripping with sweat. Here we are, Erza. Gray says, just hanging out with my buddy here, he says, looking at Natsu with a side glance. AI. Natsu adds in a nervous way. Why is Natsu talking like happy? Lucy yells, shocked after seeing how strong the Dragon Slayer is and how even the sight of the Scarlet Wizard was enough to leave him paralyzed. Ah, good, I like to see you two get along, she says, buying into the clearly bogus routine, but even the best of friends will occasionally lock horns, she says. Well, I wouldn't call him my best friend, Gray says nervously. Natsu adds, continuing his happy impression. Anyway, I need your help on a job, she says, surprising the two. Mira, you should come as well, she adds. Well, I was on my back. I overheard members of a dark guild talking about something called lullaby and referred to it as eternal slumber for anyone who hears it, she explains. So we are going to go to the Eisenwald Guild to make them give up this weapon, she says. Sounds like fun, Natsu smirks and Gray nods in agreement. Suddenly the doors open again and all eyes turn to the new faces. Marahin and Erza recognize them right away. Naruto and Sasuke, Marahin says, and the two nod. It's been so long, she says, hugging them, which catches them off guard and ruins their badass aura they had been emanating. Wow, Marahin has gotten hot, Naruto thinks with the perverted thoughts passed down from his two senseis. Both Kakashi and Jiraiya would be proud. Well, you did tell us to come by sometime, he says as she lets go. Wow, I know you too, Lucy says, walking forward. You're Naruto the Multiplier and Sasuke of the Black Flame, she says, and the two slightly gap at their nicknames. I read in Sorcerer magazine that you two left your guilds recently, she adds. Well, we are looking for a guild that we can get along with, Naruto says, scratching the back of his head, so we thought about this one, he says. Let's hope this guild is half as formidable as it's rumored to be, Sasuke says, and the looks he gets a few glares from some of the members and Natsu lets out a low growl. Oh, by the word, he smirks looking at Erza, who raises an eyebrow here, he says, and in a puff of smoke, the book she caught him stealing 2 years ago, here since you fought for it all those years ago, he says, and because I've gotten all I need out of it, he says, tossing it to her. She catches the book and looks at it, and her eyes widen, remembering why he looked familiar. Ah, the thief with a good complexion, she says, and he nods, though wishing she didn't phrase it like that. So your conscience finally got the better of you, and you've come to turn yourself in? She asks, and he shakes his head. Don't be so naive. I have borrowed many things with the intention of returning them eventually, he says casually, and she places the book down on the table. A collective gasp filled the guild, as the people who knew Erza could tell she was about to attack. I'm sorry to inform you, but our guild has no room for dishonest people, she says, and Naruto glances between the two. Is that so, Sasuke says as Naruto whispers into his ear. I won't do anything reckless, he states, turning back to the redhead. How about a deal? He asks. What do you have in mind? She asks, and he steps forward. I see a duel, she nods. Very well, I will be your opponent, she states. I was thinking 2 vs 2, he smirks looking at Naruto. Me and the dope. He stops as Naruto mumbles bastard at him vs you, and any partner you look at, hell any number you'd like, adds confidently. If you win then we leave, never to be seen in Magnolia again, he says, but if we win you shut up about something that happened 2 years ago, and let us join, he says, showing her annoyance. Fine, she says with a blunt tone. Marahan, you're up, she says, turning to the white-haired girl. Let's go outside into the forest, she says, almost pulling her teammate. The guild follows them, paying no mind to the two strangers. Mira, don't hold back, she says, and Marahan nods. Normally there would be no way in hell she'd let Erza boss her around, but this was her opportunity to see if she matched up against the two who saved Lisana. Sasuke, what are you doing? Naruto asks, grabbing the Uchiha's shoulder as he began to walk away. We came here to join, not pick a fight, he explains, and Sasuke smirks. Exactly, Sasuke states, this is our chance to not only join, but test 2 S-class wizards, he explains. Well, he wasn't taking them too lightly, he also wasn't taking them too seriously. Let's not keep them waiting, he says, and with a sigh Naruto follows them out. Meanwhile, sitting at the bar beside Master Bob, Itachi felt a chill run up his spine. Is something the matter, Itachi, honey? Bob asks. The Blue Pegasus Master had to admit Itachi was by far the cutest boy in his guild, which seemed to annoy Uchiha Vandalay Kotobuki. Hibiki Lates, Ren Akatsuki and Eve Tirm had taken a shine to the elder Uchiha and his calm manner. I just have a weird feeling in my stomach. A warning I gave is being ignored, he says, looking around. Sasuke will be the death of me again, he thinks, hoping his foolish little brother wouldn't do anything stupid. Back in Magnolia, the members of Fairy Tail watched from afar, mainly due to the well-known destructive power of their S-class wizards. Is this even a fair fight, Gray asks, and Natsu laughs. They are going to get their asses kicked. The Dragon Slayer continues Gray's trail of conversation. Still, to openly challenge those monsters makes them real men. Elfman says, clenching his fist in admiration for the two men, but that won't help against a manly beating, he adds. Down with the competitors, Erza stood across from Sasuke, while Naruto stood across from Marahan. Looks like we got roped into this, Taha. He gives a cheap grin to the white-haired wizard, who smiles back. Don't worry, I'll go easy on you, she says, playfully surprising her siblings, but in case you are stronger, go easy on me, she adds, and he laughs. Don't worry, I'm sure we can have a fun spar, he says to her in response. All joking aside, I know she is strong, he can feel it, he thinks as Sasuke coughs to get his attention. Naruto, if you are done flirting, take her someplace else, Sasuke says. I intend to test Titania's abilities, he says, and Naruto nods with a sigh. Mira, watch yourself, don't let them. Her eyes widen when the blonde suddenly hits Mira with a burst of speed, carrying her off separate as she finishes. Forget about her, Sasuke says, drawing his blade. I'm your opponent, he says, and she growls, requipping into her heaven's wheel armor. I hope your swordsmanship has improved, he says, and Erza charges at him, slashing. However, her attacks are effortlessly parried and dodged by the superior speed of the Uchiha. Quick on his feet, she thinks, thinking back to the time Marahan was talking about when she returned from that mission, so he uses illusion magic, some form of black flame magic, and a purple titan-like creature, she thinks, backing off for his counter-attack. Sasuke forms the hand sign for tiger and, inhaling a deep breath, Katen Gmirka no Jutsu. He exhales a dragon head-shaped fireball at her, causing her to have to dive out of the way with no time to equip into her Flame Empress armor. Don't lower your guard for a moment, Titania Erza, I'd like to dance a little longer, he smirks, firing multiple dragon head-shaped fireballs at her, each one bigger than the last. You don't look like a dancer, Erza says, now requipping into her Flame Empress armor. Sorry for the delay, but I found the perfect outfit for the next number, she smirks, and Sasuke grins. I wonder, he says, charges at her as their blades collide. I'll show you. Want a serious fight with me? Looks like, he declares as her eyes widen again once lightning emits from his blade. Naruto and Murahin. After being released from Naruto a good mile deep into the forest, good, this should be a safe distance, he says, turning to her with his sage mode active. This will be a good chance for me to test my abilities. He thinks, up until now I only relied on my sage mode, but now that my body has adapted, I can feel the chakra of all the tailed beasts in me, he thinks. Bulkagaya took his yang release and Sasuke's yin release. She didn't take the tailed beast's chakra, which meant he still had their respective jutsu at his disposal. You are fast and strong, Murahin says, but tell me, you separate us? She asks, if that was their plan, then why not just do one-on-ones? I'm going to fill you in on a secret, Naruto says. This is a chance for me and Sasuke to really test our power here, he explains, because our magic is different, because we are from a different world. Chapter 4. Conclusions. Welcome to madness. Another world. Murahin comments, how is that possible? She asks and he begins laughing. She says with a confused look. Sorry, I couldn't resist, he smiles. It just felt like a moment where I should say something like that, or Miragine, I am your brother, so I couldn't resist, he smirks, and after a moment to register, she lets out a giggle. Okay, I get it, she says, covering her mouth with her hand, but let's get on with the battle, she says, and begins glowing before using her takeover and transforming into her Satan soul form. Fun time is over, he voices it deeper and full of seriousness. Wow, that's pretty hot, Naruto says, slightly blushing at the sight of the demon woman. Well, let's see if you can fight, he says, and she vanishes, causing his eyes to widen. She appears behind him in fighting stance. How can you dodge me at such a speed, Mira asks. There was no way he dodged at the last second like he. Can you read my mind? She asks and he shakes his head. I can sense danger, he states, so when you attack I can dodge at the last second, although for me I have planned how when you move the first time, he explains, but if I dodge too early, I'd be open for a second attack, and at that speed, I'd be too close to you to dodge a second attack and well too late, and you hit me, he finishes, but now it's my turn to attack, he says, clenching his fist before charging at her, winding back and swinging only for her to catch it. I don't need to dodge, she smirks, only for her hand to give way to an invisible force that then collides with her stomach, causing her to fly back and land on her knees, coughing, clearly winded from the attack. My hand-to-hand combat works a little differently, he smirks, but is amazed she is still conscious. I use the natural energy around me and use it as an extension to my attacks, he explains as she stands. I see, she says, opening her palm at him as a magic circle appears, darkness stream. She calls out in multiple hand strike at Naruto. The blonde manages to dodge most, but one connects dead center in his body, sending him flying into a tree. By now members of the guild had come to watch this fight, members including her siblings, Lysana and Elfman. That's it, sis, you got him. Lysana yells in support. A few more shots, and the win is yours, she adds gleefully. You better make it count, Elfman adds, because that Sasuke has Erza on the ropes, he says, and suddenly a massive explosion of energy comes from Naruto. If you think I'm going to lose while he's winning, then you are in for a disappointing fight, because I won't, Naruto declares, making the clone hand seal cage bunshin no jutsu, he says, and 20 clones appear on each side of him, surprising her. 18 of the clones charged at her, while 2 remained behind beside him. Luckily for Murahin, these clones weren't in sage and not strong like 2 original, so she didn't have too much difficulty defeating them. However, turning around she is greeted by the sound of a whistle. Sage art. Rasen Shuriken, he says, and Murahin can feel the power emanating from it. She was amazed a blonde could hold that kind of power in his hand. The clone vanishes and her eyes widen as the second clone creates another Rasen Shuriken in his other hand. I hope you can dodge or deflect these, he says. I respect you enough to show you my strongest attack, he smirks. Murahin focuses her magical power into the space between her hands, the energy taking the form of a spherical vortex soul extinction. She says as the 2 launch their attacks simultaneously. Erza and Sasuke. Erza found herself panting harshly, holding her sword tightly, facing the unfazed Uchiha. How strong is he? She wonders. I don't have much left, she adds, having to change out her armor constantly due to his ability to use fire and lightning magic and his incredible swordsmanship. You are the strongest person I have encountered, she says, knowing she was going to have to hold down until he showed signs of stopping. He nods. He hit it well, but he had thrown powerful fire and lightning style combo at her and used his Sharingan to neutralize her attacks. As a result, he was running low on chakra, but as he looked to the sky and saw the clouds beginning to form, I can't see it in your core, he says after a moment of silence. A darkness filled with Hades states, and her eyes form a small glare. I held the same darkness in mine, he adds. I followed it, and it made me stronger, but it almost consumed me as a result, he explains. Thinking back, words don't exist that will explain how much Naruto means to the Uchiha. Even after declaring he would destroy Konoha and almost killed Sakura, twice the blonde never gave up on him and helped pull him off the path of hatred. Why are you talking about this? Erza asks curiously. She was thankful for the breather, but at the same time she disliked how he assumed he understood her past. You remind me of me in some ways, Sasuke replies, but unlike me you choose to bury your hatred and pretend everything is fine, he explains, and her eyes widen. That hatred will eventually swallow you, he states. Face your darkness, and then you will gain a new power, he explains. Until you do you can't beat me, he finishes, and she growls. He then forms the hand seals while inhaling rat, ox, dog, horse, monkey, boar, tiger, Katen. Kamasitsu, he exhales from mouth a massive stream of intense flames that set the vast area ablaze, engulfing the Scarlet in a veritable sea of flames. Erza. The observing guild members yell together as the Scarlet jumps out slightly burned as a result. That guy has flames stronger than Natsu. Natsu punches Mikao for that comment. This armor barely withstood that attack, she thinks, looking up, and her eyes widen with hope when she sees the Uchiha panting. It looks like that was your last attack, she says. Suddenly the ground shakes as off in the distance they see Naruto's and Murahen's attacks collide in a massive explosion. It looks like their fight ice over, Sasuke says, gaining Erza's attention as it begins to rain and a thunderstorm forms above them. This will be my last attack, he says. If you withstand it, you win, he states, raising his hand and shooting his Chidori into the side. Kirin come. He yells and a huge dragon roars from the clouds, leaving them stunned. This is an attack that can't be countered or dodged, he says. I used to believe it couldn't be blocked, but I was proven wrong. But you don't have the power that was used to block it, he explains, smirking, but for some reason I think you can, but your friends better run, or else they will get hit by this attack as well, he says, and on cue the spectators begin to run with Gray, Mikao and Wakaba pulling Natsu away. Bring it, Erza says defiantly, switching to her lighting Empress armor. I can do this, no I can, she thinks, reassuring herself. Now fall. Sasuke says, bringing his hand down, which caused the dragon to shoot towards Erza, who realizes her lightning armor won't be enough, vanishes in an explosion. The smoke cleared, and Sasuke's eyes widened when he saw she had changed to her adamantine armor at the last second and blocked the attack. However, she was unconscious. She lost. Sasuke turns to see her guildmates with shocked looks on their faces. Turning, he walks to her and kneels down, taking something from his pocket and placing it in her mouth. She then coughs momentarily before relaxing a bit. He then walks away towards the other battle. I'd call this a draw, he states, surprising them. I said if she blocked it, she'd win, he says. That's because now I am completely drained, so she would have had a free attack, he explains. However, while she blocked she lost consciousness, so I'll settle for a draw, and with that he leaves them alone as they run to attend to Erza, who despite the attacks didn't look although injured and would be fine with a day's rest. Naruto and Murahen, the sage and she-devil's attacks collided in a huge explosion, and the resulting force of wind hit both fighters hard. The spectators were lucky, as most of the attack went in the opposite direction, but they still felt the wind. The smoke vanished, and the two opponents lay in a huge crater. The spectators' jaws had hit the floor and their eyes, were bulgy-eyed at half the forest was missing as a result of their attacks. Panting, Naruto looks over to Murahen, who had returned to her normal self and equally panting. Draw. Naruto says, and Murahen nods. That's 2 out of 3. She jokes as they hear lighting and look up to see Sasuke's Kirin attack. Is that Sasuke? She asks and Naruto nods. Since she asked meant it wasn't Erza's, so it could only be Sasuke's. You guys are something else, she says in awe, and Naruto smirks, thinking the same of them. If Erza is pushing Sasuke to use big jutsu like that. The two are blinded by the flash of light and look away to cover their eyes. Once it dies down, Naruto sits up. Ow, ow, oh, he whines, feeling the pain all over as he stands up, surprising Murahen as she is unable to move. He walks over to her and takes out a food pill. Here, eat this, he says, and she does. It tastes bitter, but it will give you your energy back, he explains. See you around, he says, walking off. Wait, aren't you joining the guild? She asks. He seemed like a good guy and defiantly wanted him around as a sparring partner and maybe even for quests. She didn't want to bring Elfman and Lisana on. Who knows, he says. I had fun though, he says, giving a cheeky grin. See ya later, he says, and continues walking as Elfman picks Mira up. Walking away after a battle like that, what a real man. He yells as his sister's sweat drops. They then see Sasuke and their eyes widen. Did Erza lose? Dean, did you win? Naruto asks as the two turn towards the town. I drew, he says, in case Sasuke wouldn't say. Likewise, Sasuke says, and Naruto smirks. Fairy tale, it's got style, he says, and Naruto nods in agreement. The following morning, Erza and Murahen were up and well, which was surprising. The re-equipped wizard had some bandages wrapped over her arm where she was burned, but otherwise they seemed fine. I still don't like him, Erza pouts, calling that a draw. Feels like he was taking pity on me, she states. Maybe he loves you, happy giggles, and is kicked out the window with a bellowing scream by the Scarlet Wizards, while the others gape at the cat-shaped print in the glass. I like Naruto and Sasuke, Murahen says, getting back on track. I mean, they are strong, cool and nice, she explains. I mean, Naruto gave me this special pill that replenished my magic, she states, and Erza can recall Sasuke putting something in her mouth before he left. Still, Erza says in a mumble. Erza. Mira yells loudly, I put up with your shit all the time, but if we lose these two powerful wizards because of your pride, I swear I will shave your head to look like masters. The she-demon warns Erza, who looks at her with a raised eyebrow, such an empty threat, but then she had a point, the two were strong and were unique. She also wanted to know how Sasuke knew she had a dark past. Fine, Erza consents, she along with Murahin, Natsu and Gray. They walk through the market district of the city, let's just hope they haven't. Her voice trails off as she sees something she won't ever unsee. Meanwhile, Nagato walked through the town with his new partner Jura, so these are the duties of a wizard saint, he says, turning to the taller man who nods. Thank you for coming along again, Jura says, if what the details suggest, then this is more a two-person job, he states, and Nagato nods this time. Despite getting along, neither were the kind of person to start a conversation, so there was always an awkward moment of silence. Soon they arrive at the splitting point. Remember, these men have hostages in each cave, so be careful with your elemental spells, he says, and Nagato gives a nod and the two separate. Nagato had decided not to use his Rinnegan since they could attract the wrong sort of attention. He even wore special shades to prevent his eyes from being seen. Thankfully, he knew many different element-style jutsu. As he walked through the narrow path, veering to the left slightly as he peeked into the cave where the laughter could be seen. Such a pathetic town, one shouts, smashing a bottle of beer on the ground as the glass spreads everywhere. He locked eyes on the hostage where he saw a young woman with a massive bruise on her thigh. Clearly she made a break for it, and the bruise was her reward for the attempt. Nagato saw a lot of this growing up in the Hidden Rain village, where big tough men world force themselves on women and get off with just a warning due to it being a war. These men were lucky Conan wasn't here in his place, because she would have found ways to make death seem like an impossible dream. Upon getting a better look at the woman, he saw some similarities to his old friend. Her hair was blue, but much longer, reaching her lower back, but the obvious difference was her age, since she was much younger and couldn't be older than or younger than 13. Still, it's hard to believe that this brat is the Sky Maiden, another says, tossing a white fully clothed female cat that had been gagged but was still muttering loudly and could speak English, Japanisuit of her lol. The young girl's eyes were teary and the man continued on about Zareth and someone named Brain. However, once the single strand of a tear rolled down the girl's cheek, Nagato entered the cave. Forgive me, Itachi, but these men need to feel pain, he thinks as his footsteps attracts the Dark Guild's attention. INTRUDER, one guy, a man says, and they begin to lug until the black shades hit the ground and the men get a good look at the purple pattern of his eyes. What the hell? He yells, extending his hand. Bansham Tenon, Nagato says, and suddenly the cat and girl found themselves being pulled towards the man with his hand reaching towards them. He caught them in his arm and turned, move, and I will destroy your home, he says warningly, turning to leave. At him. The leader yells, and they grab their magic weapons and charge at the redhead, who stops, turning around. Take this, the closest man says. Shinra Tensei. Was the last thing those men heard before it happened. With Jura, he walked beside a politician who had been kidnapped as well. I feel so bad for the girl, she has such a kind heart, the man says to the wizard saint. She got caught because they threatened me, he explains. Do not fret, for my fellow guild member will save her, Jura says reassuringly, patting the man's shoulder. Suddenly a huge sphere of what looked like wind erased almost the entire area where Nagato was sent the men running. Once they arrived, they saw the little girl and cat sleeping in Nagato's arms and all the men lying unconscious in a massive crater where their guild hall cave had stood. What happened? Jura asks and Nagato faces him. They were persistent on keeping this girl, Nagato says bluntly. The guild she is from is the Kate Shelter Guild, he says. I've seen it before, so I will escort her home, he says. The politician offered to have her wound treated, but Nagato ignored him and left. Jura found a member of the Dark Guild who was still conscious. You explain what happened, he says, lifting the man up off the ground. The man simply mumbled, we angered a god, before passing out and being dropped to the floor. Nagato, what did you do? He thinks, looking out towards his friend had left. Elsewhere, Itachi walked through the woods following a chakra like he has never felt before, feeling it could be dangerous. He cast everyone in his guild under a genjutsu so they wouldn't follow. Once he arrives at the center of the cause and finds himself staring at Kagaya. He knew who she was thanks to Naruto and Sasuke's story, he says, and she faces him. I see the incarnations of my son have informed you about me, she says. Itachi Uchiha have seen your past, she says, and he glares, knowing what she meant. As you have guessed, I have brought you back just before you contracted your illness and have removed it from you, she says, and he nods. I also have Shisui's Manjiku, Itachi says, and she smirks. What do you want? He asks seriously. She came to him for a reason. I am simply a memory, little Uchiha, she says. I can no longer control the world, she explains. I will create your friend Second Eye if you promise to use its true power when facing against the apocalypse, she says, confusing him. I have seen your future and know that without this power, you will be forced to watch Sasuke Uchiha and Naruto Uzumaki die, she says, and he looks down. Do have no choice, he sighs, nodding. Grant me the power to protect them, and in return I will use them wisely, he says, and she smirks, and in moments Itachi feels his eyes burn as the two Manjikyu fuse due to her jutsu, creating his eternal Manjikyu Sharingan. Like Sasuke's, the back which used to be red turned black, while Shisui's pattern appeared at the first as the red color, while his own pattern, which was smaller and black, and had a more spiral look, which was in the middle of Shisui's pattern. It is done, she says, and slowly begins to fade away. I look forward to seeing how your love story unfolds, she smirks, and he looks at her with confusion. Was his stale and late reply. Magnolia. The members of the guild were gaping as they stared at the shirtless pair of Sasuke and Naruto. Man, are you sure? Naruto asks and Sasuke nods. Tsuchikage has a unique chakra, and my Sharingan can't see the chakra as colors, Sasuke explains. You have the same chakra as his Kakatemta, he adds. Now I'll show you the signs. But I don't know what else is necessary, since I can't copy Keke Genkai or Temta, he finishes. Thanks, Sasuke, Naruto says, and Sasuke coughs. Sasuke sensei, Naruto begrudgingly corrects himself, as Sasuke only agreed to help under the condition Naruto referred to him as sensei. Sasuke weaves the rat, boar and snake hand signs, and Naruto copies him. Jinten. Genkai Hikuri no Jutsu, Naruto says, and a small sphere forms before dispelling. Damn it. Naruto stomps the ground and looks at Sasuke. Look, are you sure? He asks. Yes, like Tsuchikage, the first Hokage had unique chakra which I can see in my body, Sasuke states. Now shut up, Ben, let me concentrate. He snaps and Naruto shrugs, backing away to watch, forming the tiger, ram and snake hand seals Mokuten Hijutsu. Bukai Kantan, Sasuke says, and two tiny shrubs burst from the ground, before wilting. The two glance at the dead twigs. This is stupid, I give up, Sasuke says, and begins to walk away. On their way back to Magnolia, Sasuke still had his Sharingan active after his fight, and before he retracted it, he saw multiple new chakra natures in Naruto's network. Then out of jealousy, though he wouldn't admit it, he looked at his own and saw new chakra in his own. They would never have known had it not been for his fight with Erza. Speaking of which, you guys have more spells? The Scarlet asks, sounding amazed at their variety. You two are full of surprises, she says, and Sasuke smirks. I'm glad to see you're well, Erza, Sasuke says, and she nods. I'll charge you for the pill. I fed you another time, he says, turning to Naruto. Come on, the train is departing soon, he says, and Naruto nods. Wait. Murahin says, stepping forward, grabbing the two who look at her. Erza has something to tell the both of you, she says, turning to the redhead rider. Erza, she says, and with a sigh Erza nods. Please join Fairy Tail, she says in an almost mute tone. The two shinobi glance at each other, asking for her to repeat a little louder. I would be honored if you two joined our guild, she says, and Mira smirks. Well, the two silent teen men of the guild had to fight the urge to laugh at this scene. On one condition, Sasuke says before Naruto can't speak. You, Erza, Scarlet have to become my student, he says with a wide grin. You can call it dance partner, if it's less embarrassing, he adds, and Erza shoots him a glare that would drop a silverback gorilla. Let's go, Naruto, he says in a sigh. Wait. Erza says, oh okay fine, she says, I will be your dance partner if you join, she says, and extends her hand to shake, which Sasuke takes, and she squeezes just a little tightly to send a message, and he squints as the steel of her glove feels like a vice grip tightening. Welcome aboard, Naruto, Murahin says as she and the blonde shake as well. This is Natsu, Dragneel and Grey Fullbuster, she says, introducing the two who had remained silent, and Sasuke and Naruto shake their hands. Welcome to the guild, Grey says in his usual cool manner. Hope we can fight sometime, he adds, and Natsu nods. Well, these two held Erza and Murahin to a draw. This wouldn't stop these pair of reckless wizards from attempting to beat them. Why did he take his clothes off? Both Naruto and Sasuke think simultaneously, glancing at each other since the rest weren't even phased. Must have meant this was a regular thing for Grey. Sasuke, I'd like to try your flames sometime, Natsu says, and Sasuke raises an eyebrow. I'm a fire dragon slayer, and I can eat flames, he explains, and Sasuke gives off a genuine impressed look. But this over, I'd like to get what I was planning yesterday underway, Erza says. You two can come, she says to Sasuke and Naruto, who shrug, grabbing their tops and placing them on. I will explain on the way. You need to say something important to Grey and Natsu, so the rest of you go on and we will catch up, she finishes and watches as Mira leaves with the shinobi. What's up? Natsu asks and feels Erza grip his shoulder tightly while doing the same to Grey. Their eyes widen as they feel the murderous intent emanating from the S-class wizard. Mention what I did here today, and I will make you regret the day you learn to speak, she says warningly, and the two nod. Now get going, she says, and the two run after the others. Once they are gone, she glances at the remains of the small trees. The Itachi has summoned. Why is he so strong? He have to know, she thinks. He needs to pay for what he did. Chapter 5 Time moves on. Updating the journal. It's been 7 months since I joined Fairy Tail, Lucy writes in her journal. With all the recent events she hadn't updated it. I was barely a member a week before I met some of the most famous members of the guild. She continues Marahin Stratus, the most attractive female wizard in the world, and one of the most powerful wizards of Fairy Tail. She smiles, although she is a real tomboy at heart and showed little interest in guys. She adds like a side note, then there is Erza Scarlet Aka Titania. She is arguably the strongest member of the guild. Then I met the most desired free agents of Fiori, Sasuke Uchiha and Naruto Uzumaki, who wanted to join the guild. For some reason Erza was against it and teamed up with Marahin to fight them where they fought. Still hasn't recovered. Lucy gives a loud sigh, thinking of the holes on the outskirts of town. Still the Titania and She-Devil combo couldn't beat them, although they called it a draw. I think Erza considers it a loss, which explain a lot later down the line. After dealing with Eisenwald, is this really necessary? The red-headed Requip mage asks while doing a little twirl in a schoolgirl uniform. I mean, I do look good, she says with a sly smirk, striking a sexy pose for Sasuke, who sweat drops. Alright, I only told you to call me Sensei. School uniform is all you. Sasuke sweat drops holding his sword. So when you're ready, he says, taking a fighting stance, summoning 2 swords and charging at the Uchiha. After a few hours of sparing, Erza began to realize that despite his words, this was more to help him than her. She is the perfect opponent to improve my reflexes, Sasuke thinks as he jumps away from her thrust attack. Not bad, my young apprentice, Sasuke jokes as Erza sighs, and her swords vanish. What was the point of that? She asks but gets no answer as the Uchiha begins to leave. Watching him go, she can't help but smile. She might have been wrong, but this was perhaps an indirect way of asking her for help. Damn, that temidgeting hot girls to dress up like that, Naruto mumbles in the shade, taking a break from his training when the lullaby flute transformed into a huge monster and fought against Natsu, Erza and Gray to the point of it being filled with so many holes it could no longer play its death song. Before it could do and more damage, Naruto managed to use the dust release and created a box around its head and disassembled it, and Sasuke used Mokuton Makurik no Jutsu to finish it off. However, since then they haven't been able to draw on the power, but they were making progress. Despite her protests, Erza is getting along well with Sasuke, Lysandra points out, standing beside her sister Homera. She looks to the S-class takeover mage who seems to be Deep Thought's sister. She says worriedly, I should buy a schoolgirl uniform, Mira says, and Lysandra gaps at the comment. Present time. Not too long after that I met another contender for Fairy Tail's strongest member in Laxus Dreyer Masters. Grandson Lucy shudders remembering his intimidating presence. Then me and Natsu, more Natsu and Happy, stole an S-class quest from the 2nd floor and roped Gray along and traveled to Galuna Island. Lucy writes, soon we found ourselves deep into Gray's past as he found out Lion, who trained with them under the same master, was trying to use the moon drip to melt a special ice spell that had imprisoned a monster known as Deliora, which destroyed Gray and Lion's villages. She remembers seeing Gray break down at the site. If the giant ice cube, the ice was in fact the body of their master, which turned to ice when she sacrificed herself using a forbidden spell known as Ice Shell. Lion's dream was to surpass her, and with her dead the only way he thought he could accomplish his dream was to kill the monster. She couldn't. However, after melting away Er's ice, the monster let out a single roar before dying. It turned out that all the years the monster had been trapped, had slowly depleted its life force. After that we returned to the actual job and discovered it hadn't been Lion and his group that caused the people on the island to turn into monsters. She suddenly chuckles to herself. I probably should have mentioned Erza was sent by the master to come and get us, but also ended up getting dragged into it too. It was thanks to her and Natsu that the residue caused by the moon drip to be destroyed and the curse on the villagers was lifted, although apparently they were monsters the whole time and the moon drip altered their memories. She sighs remembering their reactions and that the chief continued to badger them about destroying the moon. Soon after that we returned to the guild expecting fierce punishment, but instead, the day they returned from, as they walked through the town main street they bumped into Sasuke and Naruto, who were shopping for dinner. The sight of these two doing something as trivial as this looked amusing. Hey guys. Natsu called to them. Welcome back, Naruto says, walking over to them, leaving the now annoyed Uchiha carrying all the bags. How did it go? He asks, knowing full well they took an S-class job. Asked with flying colors, Natsu smirks and the two high-five, while Lucy shouts, it was a little more complex than that. Thanks for giving me the idea, he says, and Naruto pales as Erza glares at him like she did the others. I bet you had a hand in this too, Uchiha. The redhead points accusingly at Sasuke, who raises an eyebrow. What's my little student talking about? He asks, ruffling the Scarlet's hair. Since joining the guild, Sasuke has made it his mission to ruin Erza's fearful reputation around the guild so more people would stand up to her and her bossy attitude. These guys stole an S-class job and will be punished for it, she says to him to fill him in. She watches as he takes a bite out an apple he picked from the bag. They took a job, so? He says, chewing on the apple before swallowing. How can they test their improvement if they can't try harder jobs? He asks her once again, challenging her authority. The guild has these rules for a reason. Erza begins with a sigh, closing her eyes. Once master makes them S-class, then they can go on these kind of jobs, she explains. I wouldn't expect you to understand Uchiha. She smirks, opening her eyes to see he wasn't even listening. Uchiha. She growls, pulling a group of her prisoners away towards the guild to face their punishment. You shouldn't rile her up, Naruto says with a frown, while Sasuke simply smirks as they carry their shopping back to their house. Present. Not too long after we were attacked by the Phantom Lord Guild, who had actually been hired by my father to bring me back to him since I had ran away. As a result, our guild hall was destroyed, and my best friend Levi and his teammates Jet and Droy were seriously hurt and hung to a tree like trophies, but we got major payback and invaded their guild hall. But our invasion was cut short when Master was drained of his magic energy. Sasuke and Naruto damaged their reputation by going out on a job, rather than helping us fight off Phantom's counterattack, which saw Erza take the blast of an Jupiter cannon. Thanks to Natsu, Elfman, Gray and a weakened Erza, we prevented them from firing a second cannon shot and from performing the Abyss Break spell. Then when it looked like Erza was about to die from out of nowhere, Sasuke saved her and defeated Phantom Guildmaster Oze. But then Oze launched a sneak attack at Erza, and Sasuke had to jump in and take the attack seriously, getting hurt in the process. The Master Makarov saved them both and performed Fairy Law, one of Fairy Tail's 3 legendary spells, on Oze and defeated him. After the battle ended, Naruto returned with a huge sack containing ribbons from Phantom's other guild halls around Fiori, which he single-handedly wiped out for hurting his comrades. Once the council found out about the war, Phantom was disbanded and Oze was stripped of his status as a wizard saint. I returned home and warned my father to never come after Fairy Tail again. As I was leaving, Natsu, Happy, Gray and Erza all came to stop me from quitting Fairy Tail. She chuckles. Soon the guild was rebuilt, and I even got a compliment from Sasuke, called me a female version of the dope, which apparently means he respects me according to Naruto. She laughs nervously, not really believing it. For a while Sasuke and Erza went on a few jobs together, and their rivalry slowly showed signs of fading. It was around this time I learned that Loke was actually Leo the Lion and the leader of the Zodiac. He had been banished from the celestial world due to an incident that resulted in the death of his summoner, who had been mistreating her spirits until Loke took a stand. The Celestial King lifted the banishment after seeing how Loke had repented for his mistake, even if it was for the right reason. As a thank you for helping him, he gave me 7 tickets to a fancy resort he got as a payment for a job. I brought Natsu, Gray, Erza, Murahin, Sasuke and Naruto. Soon Naruto and Murahin went on their own little date around the theme park, while Erza challenged Sasuke to a bunch of the games, which ended in another draw. I think Erza only won the last game because a draft blew up her skirt and distracted Sasuke. At least I know he's a guy, though she smirks, remembering the blush on the normally confident Uchiha's face. Meanwhile, having been busy with fitting in, they hadn't had the time to discuss what happened with Itachi and Kagaya. However, since they were passing his current hometown on their way back from a mission, Sasuke and Naruto figured it would be a good time to stop by. She was careful with the word she chose. Itachi says after going into detail of what happened in the forest, but I guess I won't know what she meant until I come face to face with this apocalypse, he says. I wonder if she's been watching us since we got here. Naruto says, sipping the lemon-flavored tea. They had been on this job with Erza and Murahin, which was an S-class. Makarov decided to alter the S-class request board so that as long as you had an S-class wizard with you, then you can take jobs from the board. The 2 S-class wizards were the ones to ask Sasuke and Naruto to come with them. In the 7 months since joining, the 2 have mastered the dust release and wood release to almost perfect levels. However, they were still restricted. Naruto could only use it 5 times a day, and it had a 44% chance of failing. As for Sasuke, well, he wasn't limited in use or risk of failing. The more he used it, the weaker he got due to it being draining and not having Naruto's chakra reserves. More than likely, Sasuke says, I think she had a plan sending us here, he states, looking at his tea. I mean, for all we know she is in our world finishing her plan, he explains. In honesty, he hadn't thought about their old world a lot, mainly due to being around Fairy Tail, which made him feel welcome at especially a certain redhead who he had grown rather fond of due to learning more about her past. There is nothing you can do now, even if that's true, but I doubt it is, Itachi says. I am surprised she knew about Uchiha's secrets like the eternal Manjikyu, he says. But anyway, I thought you guys should know, he finishes explaining. Did you tell Nagato? Naruto asks, and Itachi shakes his head. How come? I mean, I haven't heard from him in a while, but surely you have. Naruto asks again, and Itachi looks out the window. I sent a clone to see him, but according to the guild master, he quit to join Kate's shelter, Itachi says, and since that guild grows its own food and makes its own clothes, the only way to find Kate's shelter is by knowing a member, he sighs. So how are we supposed to contact him? Naruto asks, well, we could use a combination of my clones and your birds, he says, answering his own question. Itachi smiles, seeing Naruto is his usual happy self, but looking at Sasuke, he sees a glint in his younger brother's eyes which he hadn't seen since before he wiped out their clan. Sasuke was happy. That was my plan, Itachi says. After sending a number of clones and crows in various directions, the two teens left Itachi's. Maybe keeping them together was a good thing, he thinks, watching the two bicker as they walk into the distance. Soon we'll all be guildmates, he says, closing the door. Lucy's apartment. While we were at the resort, people who knew Erza came and captured her after beating Natsu and Gray and tying me up. I wonder if things would have been different if Naruto and Sasuke could have came to the casino that night, but because of these events we learned something about Erza. Hour of Heaven. Fairy Tail invaded the tower in search of the captive redhead. It didn't take too long for them to find her, as she had already begun her own attack on the tower. After Simon, her old friend, freed Sho from Jel's spell, they split up to take the corrupt wizard saint down. Sasuke and Erza stood together. You know the layout, don't you, she asks, and he nods. So then do I have the door that leads to Jel? She asks, looking away from him, her eyes widen when she feels his hand run through her hair. I like your hair, he says, and she gasps slightly. Your path leads to Jel, he finally answers, still combing her hair with his fingers. This is your fight, I know that, he explains. I will cut off his reinforcements, leaving him alone just for you, he continues. But if you expect to beat him, then you will need to lose this armor you have covered yourself with, he states. But without it will be vulnerable, she mutters quietly. He didn't understand her, she needed the armor to be strong and fearless. If I don't have it then I will be weak, she adds, and he spins her around. I'll be your armor, he declares, and her eyes widen further slightly. You have a kindness in you that is smothered by this armor, so let me and everyone else take its place, he explains as she stares at him in awe. You are the heart of this guild, so don't hide it away. He smirks. Now let's see if Jel can keep up with our dance moves, he says, and she smiles. Sure, she says, and Sasuke begins to run on ahead. But Sasuke, since you are seeing my past, I'd like to know how our darkness is the same, she says, and he nods before continuing on his own, while she went to face Jel. Present. I was on a boat for the fight between Erza and Jel, but apparently she had him beaten until the council fired an Etherean blast, which allowed him to take the lead. She pauses, then the tower exploded, and we all thought Erza had been killed and Sasuke as well since he stayed behind, but they were at the beach waiting. Sasuke's back was badly burned, and Erza was sleeping peacefully in his arms. She smiled, remembering how peaceful Erza looked. They refused to go into detail about what happened, but they said Simon was killed by Jel. However, it wasn't until a few after we saw off Sho, Milana and Wally. The beach. Erza sat on the sand, lifting the sand up and letting it slip through her fingers. I can't believe all this has happened, she mutters to herself. Sometimes our past catches up to us no matter how fast or far we run. She turns to see Sasuke walking up to her before sitting down beside her. Still, in the end, Jel was freed from whatever was controlling him, he says, looking at the horizon. She looks at him with wide eyes. He told me to look after you, he says. So I did hear him, she thinks to herself, remembering how she heard him say she had gotten stronger. Well, thank you for everything, Uchiha, I mean Sasuke, she says, correcting herself, standing up. Then to Mirza, he smiles as she leaves him alone. Present. It seems Sasuke has the magic touch. Lucy smiles. Soon after we got back, the Fantasia parade was colossal. At first we had to deal with a new problem. Former members of Phantom Lord Juvia and Gagiel had joined Fairy Tail. Well, Juvia wasn't so bad, it was Gagiel who trashed the old guild and attacked Levi, Jet and Roy, and him being there felt like what he did was okay. Lucy thinks back, remembering how afraid Levi was and would be on the verge of tears whenever he was around. He got a little respect from the guild after allowing Jet and Roy to take revenge on him, and then not only allow Laxus attack him without a fight, protected Levi when Laxus attacked her. This act made Levi's fear vanish and instead planted the seeds of the crush on the Iron Dragon Slayer. Soon Laxus and his Thunder God tribe freed Evergreen and Bixlow showed up during the Miss Fairy Tail contest and took me and all the other girls hostage by turning us into stone statues and forced the guild members to fight each other. Freed also used his powers to prevent Master, Natsu and Gagiel from leaving the guild hall, so they were forced to try and free Erza, and thankfully they did, but she punished them for almost breaking her. Erza quickly found and defeated Evergreen, and as a result me and the others were free. Marahin went looking for Elfman, while Lysana and I went looking for the last two members of Laxus's team. While Levi tried to take the barrier down, Master apparently collapsed due to illness and was on the verge of death. In the canyons, Freed defeated both Kana and Juvia and then Lysana, and while Marahin tended to the girls, Elfman faced Freed. But since Elfman had already been eliminated by Evergreen, he was tortured by Freed's dark creature. Though I wasn't there due to my fight with Bixlow, apparently Marahin beat Freed to the point of near death for what he did to Elfman. The only reason he was still alive is because Naruto appeared out of nowhere and calmed her down. Speaking of near death, if it hadn't been for Loke, Bixlow would have killed me, But thanks to our combined efforts, we had him beaten, and thus it was down to Laxus. However, Laxus turned out to be a dragon slayer as well, and beat both Natsu and Gajiel in a fight, but the two managed to weaken him enough for Sasuke, who saved them from Laxus's anger-filled attack after Fairy Law failed to kill anyone. Outside, Erza and Naruto teamed up to take out the Thunder Palace which Laxus had set up so he could use the whole town as hostages. I still remember seeing hundreds of swords and copies of Naruto's rained down onto the lightning-filled lacrima, and the whole lot of them were destroyed. But as a result of the body link magic they both suffered major shock attacks. Everyone now too exhausted to even stand watched as Laxus and Sasuke battled on the roof of the cathedral. Laxus vs Sasuke, you think you can beat me? Laxus asks arrogantly as lightning shoots around his body. Lightning Dragon Demolition Fist. Laxus's attack shoots at the Uchiha who was engulfed in the explosion. Ha, I knew you were nothing but hot air. The Lightning Dragon Slayer yells mockingly until the smoke clears and Sasuke is surrounded by a purple creature. Susanoo? Sasuke growls with his eternal Mangekyou Sharingan glowing. His Susanoo took the form when he first used it against White Zetsu in the cave. This is my ultimate technique, Laxus here through Sasuke declares as Laxus growls. Lightning Dragon's Heavenward Halberd. Laxus yells throwing his attack at Sasuke. Isaka no Magatama. Sasuke retaliates as his Susanoo hurls the attack towards Laxus. The spells collide and when the smoke clears Laxus is laying on his back, however Sasuke's Susanoo is covered with chips and cracks. Present. After that Laxus was expelled from Fairy Tail, but he showed admiration for Sasuke's Susanoo spell. While Sasuke seemed impressed, Laxus was up and walking after taking his attack. In the end the parade went off without any problems and everything has returned to normal. So there you go mom, even if my role in these stories were small I hope I did you proud. Lucy smiles. I am loyal member of Fairy Tail and I have some of the best friends a person can ask for. I'll write more when I make some more memoriously. I hope these ones are nicer, she says finishing off her entry. Hey Lucy. She hears Natsu yell from outside her window. Opening it she sees him, Happy, Gray and Erza standing outside. While Natsu waves a poster. We got work he says, and she smile. Hold on, I'll be right down she says closing the window and exiting her apartment. Turning the lights off. Mom, keep watching, because I'm sure the adventures are still coming. She thinks walking off into the early morning sun with her team as they walk to the station much to Natsu's chagrin. I really love Fairy Tail. What if Naruto 3rd Generation Dragon Slayer, and thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part. Comment down and thanks for watching the video and see you guys next video.